So let's start with the elephant in the room. The readings that they chose for the feast of St. Patrick begin with, "Be serious and sober-minded." Just doesn't seem fair. But what St. Peter tells the people, he tells them to be hospitable. He tells them to serve one another, to be good stewards of God's grace. And that whatever we do, we need to do it with God and in God. Then Jesus in our gospel, he comes to the apostles. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but whenever they mention the apostles, they never catch anything until Jesus tells them to. They never catch anything. They could not have been very good fishermen. Some people say, by the way, that's the sign of a vocation. If you're bad at everything you do, you should be a priest. St. Patrick had been a slave. He was taken as slave. And it was only by his experience of being a slave that he could tell others of the freedom that they have in the Lord. And so let's look at Peter. When Peter is selfish, he catches nothing. When he's thinking about himself, he says, "We've worked hard all night, we haven't caught anything. Just leave me alone or go somewhere else." But he does what Jesus says. And then there is this miraculous catch. And the nets are ripping. And Peter falls down at Jesus and he says, "Go to someone else." All right? He says, "Lord, clearly you have made a mistake. I'm a sinful man. Depart from me." Peter's thinking about himself. He's selfish. When we are thinking about ourselves, we are controlled by fear. Not the good kind, not the fear of the Lord. But we are afraid because we're focused on us, and we can never be enough. Only God. And so Jesus tells him that he is going to make him, he says, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." This is before the death and resurrection. Do not be afraid. You are going to catch men. After the resurrection, we find this in John's gospel. After the resurrection, they're out fishing again. And they catch nothing. And Jesus is on the shore and he says, "Throw your nets on the other side." I don't know if you've ever done any fishing. This side of the boat or this side of the boat doesn't make much difference to the fish below. But they do it. And they have this huge catch of fish. I think it was 153. They only knew of 153 different types of fish back then. So the number is important. It's not just a big, it's all. And that time now, with Jesus, the nets do not break. The nets were full of all these fish, but they did not break. And Jesus calls Peter. And he doesn't tell Peter to not be afraid. He says, "Do you love me?" And Peter responds, "Yes." 3 times Jesus asks him if he loves him. 3 times Peter says, "Yes." Peter's fear is overcome by love. St. Patrick, he goes back to Ireland. And he's a missionary to pagans. And he calls them to Christ. And those who already knew of Christ, he calls them back to practicing their faith. He's like St. Peter. God uses him to be a missionary to other people, to be a catcher of men. as we celebrate the feast of St. Patrick. How am I enslaved? What is enslaving me? And how can I be freed by following Jesus? How can I be freed from my selfishness, my self-concern, my dependence on me? How can I be free so I depend on God and so I follow God's will, not mine? And I guarantee you, when you do this, when we do this, we will be missionaries. We will be catchers of men and women for Jesus.